Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
To start off with, would you guys just like to say your names and where you are?
I'm Ann Bowman, and I am in Arcadia, Indiana.
And I'm Charlie Bowman, and I'm in Arcadia, Indiana too, but also sitting in our home office.
Okay. So the first question that we actually have when we do interviews with pairs of people is, who are you to each other? What is your relationship about?
Oh,
You want me to go?
sure.
I oftentimes just go with whatever comes to my mind. And when you asked that question, the first thing I remembered was sitting in our very first Gestalt training. We went through our initial training together some 40 years ago. I don't know how long. And the trainer pulled us aside after a 10-day training session and said, if you guys don't break the confluence, you're going to make a lot of enemies in life. Well, I don't think we have a lot of enemies, and I don't think we've ever really broken the confluence. So, in a good way. So that's, we've been together so long now that I think most traditional Gestaltists would believe that's pretty unhealthy how enmeshed we are. But for me, it works very well, and I love her dearly. Okay.
Thank you. So, so who? Say that question again. Is it who is Charlie to me, or
who are you to each other?
Who are we to each other? So yeah. So on that note, so the confluence for me was that's where we fell in love, was in the Gestalt training program. Sometimes a no, but happens all the time. We're a success story. And we're married, and who we are to each other, who I think is, we have family together, we're committed to each other, and we have businesses together. One is a Gestalt training program in Indianapolis, and the other is just our private practice. And we're launching into older age as in some ways as farmers.
Okay.
Yes, we live in a log cabin in the woods, and then we're really blessed with part of the other acreage is a field, and so we have a big garden with chickens and flowers and all sorts of fun stuff. So that's who we're evolving as a couple to be. Yeah, raised 5 kids and have 8 grandkids, and we're also very involved with them as well.
Oh,
yeah. We stay pretty busy.
We do.
So how many years have you two been together?
I think it's 35, 36.
Yeah.
Something like that. We've been married over 33.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a little piece of history there.
A piece of history, yes. And Gestalt has been, as you know, sort of just saying, Gestalt has been actually part of our connection, part of the glue that keeps us together and gives us a commonality.
Yeah, I would say we've shared our dreams every morning for 30 plus years. So Gestalt therapy has really given us a framework for how to relate with each other and experience ourselves.
Okay. Well, the next question, I guess, would be who each of you are as a human being. Some of your qualities or your passions, your particular values.
Good.
Geez, that's a tough question.
It is a tough question.
Well, I very much value spontaneity and authenticity. I don't rehearse things, which sometimes that makes my teaching more challenging. But I very much like to live off the cuff. I don't plan things out much. And I find, Anne mentioned evolving, and I find myself very much, we've lived in this location for about 7 years, and I find myself more and more just moving to being, I like to be in the dirt, and I like to plant things and grow things. And so my life is very, I haven't integrated that yet. And so I'm very bifurcated between being a Gestalt trainer, educator, practitioner, and being a novice farmer. In Indiana, where we live, that word typically means large industrial, agricultural, high business. And I'm just talking about a little chunk of land where we grow our own food, and I'm loving it. And so I'm evolving and working towards integrating those two things. I've got as far as when I'm in the dirt, when I'm working on the around the farm, Gestalt sensory awareness is really powerful for me. I notice the bugs and the flowers and the birds and the animals, and how some of that translates back into my therapy. I'm not exactly sure, other than I think the word grounded really literally means getting dirty and getting soil. So for me anyway, so that's a little bit about who I am, I think.
Okay.
So that is a hard question. Like, who are you? Because I do feel I can only answer that, of course, as who I am in this moment. And I really do feel that I'm aware of, and I'm kind of delighted by being 64 and realizing that life for me continues to change and evolve, and I continue to change and evolve. And so I'm excited about that. I feel in this moment, it's a bit like maybe the way I felt as an adolescent or in my 20s, where I feel like I'm kind of in an in-between. So I'm letting go of some things and I'm moving into embracing others. And I think what I'm moving into embracing is my own, becoming the crone of the, in womanhood, and having really never seen myself that way before. And knowing that I have learned a thing or two. I can pass some things on, and I'm excited about that. And I don't even know what that is yet, but I know that I am becoming. Growing into and embracing, and that kind of, I guess, what it means to be older and wiser. And I used to think that would be an awful thing, and that that comes from that hanging on to youth and hanging on to what is seems to be valued, at least in my culture, youth, and saying, no, I'm not young, and my joints ache, and, I'm, changing, and and that's okay. And there's not just a place for me. There, could be a very exciting life. I feel like that. Like, oh, actually, I like my life, and I think I've got a lot of roads to continue to walk down and explore. So that's as I sit here today, that's who I feel I am.
Okay. And it's interesting with the two of you having shared history. At the same time, I'm aware that you're distinct individuals. I'm wondering for each of you, what event or circumstance in your life would you say has really shaped who you are?
Want me to go again?
Yeah, if you have it. Go ahead.
Probably the most significant event for me is twofold. In about an 18 or 20 month period, when I was between 18 and 20 years old, both my parents died. And so from a very early age, I have been independent. And that independence has taken me through a lot of different things. Attachment to other authority figures, rebellion like crazy. I was a crazy hippie. And then finally to finding my own way. And then realizing too that sometimes finding my own way is the hard way. There's a lot of things that have already been figured out that if I could learn to trust and rely on other people too, then life would be easier. So I think that event for me probably, and so that made it, as between 18 and 20, when I discovered Gestalt therapy towards, I guess, the end of my 20s, I'm not sure when it was, that fit so well because I was already in my own version of organismic self-regulation because there wasn't anybody left in my life to regulate me. And I had grown to really love that. So I started out as a fiercely independent fighter, and it was my way and nobody was going to tell me otherwise. And I've learned and continue to learn, particularly in this new wave of change that's occurring, how to collaborate, how to appreciate others, how to respect and learn about my own prejudices and acceptance and appreciating diversity and those things. So that's been an evolution that those were probably the triggering events for me.
Okay. What about you, Anne?
Well, I'm aware as I sit here and I contemplate that question, I'm aware that my belly is a little talking to me and my heart is beating. And so I've been sitting here as you've been speaking, Charlie, and listening to you, and also at the same time being a little distracted about, oh, how do I use this energy to support me right now because I really, when you asked that question, my mind just kind of went blank. Like, what is, something, an event or something that's changed me? And what I think where I've gone to in this moment is that I think what has really, an event that has continued to be a series of events that had changed my life dramatically was getting into our Gestalt training program. I came from a very traditional background, and I was kind of in a sense, kind of a lost child. And so I just kind of wandered into places, and the good news is I had people that helped me along the way to get some experiences that I might not have done, and including going to college. I can thank my dad for that, who sort of who registered me and got me admitted to Indiana University in Bloomington. And I found myself sitting there in a very liberal college and getting my eyes opened. But then what I picked was kind of a traditional, I don't regret it, but I picked a traditional field of study. And when it was from psychology, I went into nursing. And so, and I don't regret that, but it was kind of a traditional role. And when I met, we actually worked together at a St. Vincent Stress Center, and met a woman whose name I will name because I appreciate her so much. Her name was Pat Cox. And Pat Cox introduced me and Charlie too, but since we're talking about me, introduced me to Gestalt, into a Gestalt training program. And what happened from that was I was able to break out of my structure, I guess, that I had brought with me to that point in my life in my later 20s. And I was able to break out of that. And I was also able to break into my own experience and discover who I was, and outside of the structure I'd grown up in. What are my thoughts? What do I want? What's Ann Bowman about? And it was really life-changing for me. And I made some big changes from that, and influenced me not just professionally, but personally in a wonderful way. And I have continued both as student and trainer to continue that path. And Gestalt has the Gestalt, I mean, the philosophy, the theory, and actually just the lived experience that I have come to know has walked with me and helped me to evolve greatly, and change my life, change my worldview, change my relational life. And so I would say that those are things that have, and Gestalt being that platform that has allowed me to have many events, I suppose, just when I needed them, just when I was ready for them.
Okay. So, Charlie, how would you say that Gestalt has affected you?
Geez. It is so to continue on from losing my parents, like our theory would kind of predict, I was all the way over on this polarity of anarchical independence. And this dependency side of me was very hungry. And so when I latched on to Gestalt, that's what fed me. So I introjected everything. I mean, I memorized every book I could read. I became obnoxiously Gestalt focused. And
let me just say, when we worked together at St. Vincent, one of the psychiatrists said about Charlie, said, and Charlie is Mr. Gestalt. And that was when you were probably about 28, 29.
Yeah. So
obnoxious face.
Yeah. So I, as I got involved in Gestalt training through the Indianapolis Institute, which had just recently started with, it was kicked off by Joe Zinker and some Cleveland people, and I knew that was for me. So I moved into that organization and ended up leading it. But and that's a scary thing in Gestalt organizations. when you're standing up in front of the group or at the podium or wherever you might be, and you realize you're speaking from this position that's supposed to be genuine and authentic and spontaneous and connecting, and it's a lot. It's not like memorizing a speech. And I found that to be so intrinsically exciting. And that's the piece I think has changed me the most, is not so much anymore anyway, the content of Gestalt therapy. I know that pretty well. It's the excitement that comes from being on that edge. And so I even think that's why I like farming, because you, no matter what you're doing, it could be herding cats, but you can always be on the edge. And so that's, I like that a lot. And that's probably the biggest way Gestalt therapy has influenced me. If you asked me that question tomorrow, I'm sure I would have a completely different answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a particular piece of Gestalt that is a favorite, or that is like your current love or interest or excitement for either of you?
Go ahead.
A current piece of Gestalt. Oh, I have to think about that. I mean, I really,
I mean, I don't know if current piece was the way to
yeah.
properly. Sort of more, is there a particular part of it or a theme or an area that you really resonate with?
Well, for me, the theme or the area that I resonate with is which you could probably hear from the things that I've been saying, is being open and curious, the openness and the curiosity of not a formulated prescription of, this is who you are, this is who I think you should be, but more of the discovery of who am I, who are you, the elusive I thou experience that's very elusive but so magical when it happens, and being I guess myself coming to this place and others coming to this place where we're open to being changed and open to being creative in a creative process, which means if we're being creative, we're open to being changed and influenced. And I love and I really do love it, and I appreciate it so much, the value of, for lack of a better way to put it, confusion. That confusion is it's not a bad place to be. No, you don't need to know all the answers. In fact, if you stay with it, and I had a trainer a long time ago, Bob Wagner is his name, and said to me, I was confused and it was very uncomfortable, and he said, just stay with that confusion. It was the first time I really allowed myself to do that, and it was the right thing to do, and a very novel something came from that. And so I love that part, and I encourage people when I'm working with others, or even if I'm just in relationship with others, that stay with that. Don't prematurely satisfy and jump to some conclusion just to have a sense of safety that is usually a false sense anyway. So I think that's where I get joy, when I see that and when I'm in that, and I trust that process.
Okay. So I know that, sorry.
No, let's go.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that for me, if Bob Resnick wrote on his bio, he used to have a line that said he was interested in what is and what is not Gestalt therapy. And I picked up on that a long, long time ago, because I have this real keen interest in history. And the combination of those two things led me to constantly be exploring what is and what is not Gestalt therapy. So I bring that to the table too, and particularly as it involves relational Gestalt therapy. I was a very early advocate that we not use that adjective. And I obviously lost that war, which is okay, because I've come to understand it a little bit differently. But lately, that's where my attention is shifting, and we will publish a chapter later on this year that has to do with a comparison of contemporary and traditional Gestalt therapy methods. So that's my current interest.
Okay. I know that both of you are involved, obviously, in your institutional community and also AAGT and other organizations. But I'm wondering if you find any kind of meaning in the phrase Gestalt community. Do you feel that you're part of that? Is that significant for you? What would you say about Gestalt community?
You go.
Again.
The Gestalt community has been hugely important to me. It still is. I'm receding from it some. I'm not as active online as I used to be. I'll brag a little bit. I along with Phil Brownell and Brian O'Hara, we started the AAGT listserv, and so I've always been active in that. But I haven't been able to keep up with it. Now it's watching the Gestalt community, Gestalt L included, grow online has been wonderful. And I'm feeling a little marginalized, and in a kind of a savory, satisfactory way of, oh, this is huge, and it's growing, and it's lovely, and I'm not center stage, and that's okay with me. It's difficult for me. I have a touch of narcissism, but yes, I do. I also am very comfortable jumping in when I do, and. So the Gestalt community means a lot. In Indianapolis, I would say really all of our social contacts and all of our friends are Gestalt practitioners or Gestalt trained. So, and then I have sort of an international online group of friends that are also all Gestalt. It's everything I do. I should probably develop some other things.
I don't know how much help they'll be in your farming career, but
well, yeah,
you need to diversify a little bit.
It's hard to ask a tomato, what are you aware of?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
What about you, Anne? Gestalt community, what is that for you?
Well, it's for me, when I think of Gestalt community, it makes me smile, and yes, it is. I have met wonderful people in the Gestalt community, both here locally and internationally. You being one, Heather. That here we are.
Yeah, you answered an email, and you're the reason that I'm here, actually.
Well, I'm glad.
I'm glad you got around to that particular email.
Yes, yeah. Well, there's that too. So email's the whole. So the online. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So the online community sometimes whirls past me, and I don't necessarily. There are a lot of people that really connect that way in a good way, and for me, that's a little bit more difficult. For whatever reason, by the time I get around to responding to something, the train has long left the station. But just one-on-one, just meeting people, getting to know people internationally, I've made some wonderful, lasting intimate friends, as well as locally. And so I definitely value the Gestalt community, and it is a big part of our life. And we do have friends that aren't Gestaltists or aren't therapists, and I value them too. But yes, it's extremely important, and I'm sure will continue to be.
I'm just wondering now, did any of your kids get into this kind of stuff, or have they gone off on completely different directions?
So our kids are, well, I was starting to say with the Gestalt community that it's a diverse community, and I like that too. And so it's not just all a big love fest by any means, as you know. It can be challenging and
Love pitchforks sometimes.
right, exactly. And I'm all right with that. That feels authentic and interesting to me. And so our kids are like that too. They're all fairly diverse in what they're doing and what their passions are. And we have had two of our kids, or well, in a sense, two of our kids, our son, Daniel, and his wife, Emma, actually went through our Gestalt training program. Daniel's a lawyer, and but he wanted to do it because I think he wanted to just expand himself personally, and wanted to use Gestalt as a way of doing that and understanding himself and others. And then our daughter-in-law, Emma, is a social worker, and she is involved in Gestalt and uses that in her practice with children. She works with little ones, and yeah. So, and then our other kids are kind of out doing their own thing, in technology, and one's a nurse, and the other one is, what would she be, administrative person, VP, and then we have our environmentalist that lives in Seattle.
Okay.
So and they've all been very influenced by Gestalt therapy.
Yeah.
Stephen Pearls gave a speech at the 10th Gestalt Journal conference where he talked about he and Renata being sequestered in their bedrooms while Fritz and Laura led group down in the living room. And we never sequestered our children like that. We always included them. So I remember many times when we do a big graduation celebration every year for our student graduation, and they've always come and helped decorate and set up and be a part of it, and clean up after a weekend and things like that. So we've always kept them involved in it, and probably more to the point, tried to really adhere to the values of Gestalt therapy in raising them. I want to tell you a funny story. It's brief. Daniel, the lawyer, who's a pretty analytical guy and brilliant, he was under 10 anyway, and he came to a training session we had, and this was 20 plus years ago or so, and he got there early, and this was a session where we used to make a plaster of Paris mask, and people would decorate both the inside of the mask and the outside of the mask and then share it. In that particular training group, we had a gentleman who was very robust and very tall and sort of having some issues with his sexuality, maybe, I'm not exactly sure. But at any rate, he made this mask. Daniel walks in the room and greets him with this mask on. Daniel's a little guy. This guy's towering over him. And his mask has a giant penis coming right out of the forehead. And Daniel was mesmerized. He just stood there and stared at that, and he didn't know what to make of it. But later in life, he became so enthralled with it that not only did he graduate from law school, he also has taken a Gestalt training. So he's not only analytical, but also a very sensitive attorney. So.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So what we're trying to say is, yeah, the stories of your interviewing our children that they could tell.
Yeah, they could tell some good
And then
stories.
there was the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. My own kids have been very involved in.
Yeah.
I was thinking that same thing.
Yeah.
Those are the sorts of things that really open people up. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when life hits you unexpectedly, and all of a sudden I'm faced with a very new experience that I have to put it somewhere in my world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. I'm wondering also what you would say some of the greatest challenges that you have faced within, somehow related to Gestalt, might have been, either in your practice, in your institute, or as people. What have been some of the things you've run up against and gotten stuck with for a while?
Oh, I'll just go with what came up for me was personally as a couple, it's an interesting process too, to be both therapists and to be both gestaltists and to be trainers. I would say the biggest challenge that we run into, or at least what came up for me, was the expectation of I'm going to say, being in the Gestalt way with each other. Like we should be able to get through arguments without ever saying you, or or resorting to the same old fixed patterns that we can get into, and so sometimes that's a struggle, and I guess as I'm saying this, I guess that what it is the expectation, the attachment to, we should be able to do this better, and now we get down in the mud and the muck and go around the barn over and over again, and that gets frustrating.
Literally or metaphorically?
Yeah, both and. Yeah. So that gets challenging for me at least. Yeah.
You mean you're still like visceral, neurotic human beings even
That's
after?
right.
Yeah.
Like, how can that be?
Yeah.
After all this time, how could that be? But yep, that's challenging.
Yeah, that's challenging for the ego as well to recognize that.
It is. Yeah. It is.
I'm laughing at your metaphors of mud, muck, barn. Yeah, I'm not the only one.
That's right.
I just imagine Anne chasing Charlie around the barn.
Yeah.
That's right.
No.
So I absolutely agree with that on a personal level. I would say two other places for me that have been very challenging. One was I worked in corporate America for 20 years because I needed to pay for these kids to go to college and benefits and that sort of thing. And I ran their clinical programs for employee assistance, things like that, work and family. Introducing a Gestalt model in that world was very challenging all the time. And the only reason I did get Gestalt therapy added to all of the mental health contracts for this company, which was a Fortune 10 company at the time. And I finally did that just by saying, I won't renew your contract if you don't add it, because conveying and demonstrating the value of it is very difficult in a capitalistic, money-driven world. So that's one area, and then the other area is just the challenge of organizing, and I'm sure you know, Hedda, just organizing Gestalt people into a group and trying to reach a consensus on anything is it has taught me patience beyond my imagination. So that's also a challenge. And
You mentioned a little while ago a very Gestalt organizational phrase, which is herding cats. I've understood.
Yeah, right.
yeah, it
Yes.
fits. Yeah, and also trying to raise our family that way. Uh, Maybe it's not always the best way. Sometimes a benevolent dictatorship is not a horrible thing. Like never put out to a family of 7, where do you guys want to go for dinner?
Yeah. Right.
Unless you really mean breakfast the next morning. So so kind of finding that balance of Gestalt principles and practicalities in life.
Okay. Well, I'm also wondering, for some people, it's not a category or a theme that they really want to speak to, but I'm curious for both of you, how you have come to understand and experience and live yourselves in a gendered way. And if your Gestalt experience has particularly colored that. So I guess on being a man, being a woman, how your experience or how you understand yourselves probably has a lot to do with one another as well. But
so I have a little trouble. Ask your question again about in a gendered way. So
how you live yourself in your gender.
Oh, okay.
How you understand yourself, because you, I mean, you said you have a lot of traditions.
I get it. Yeah. So I identify as a woman, and I'm comfortable identifying as a woman, and so and I don't know if this is going to answer your question or not, but I can tell you what comes up for me is that my journey as a woman has also been an evolution. I've always identified as female. Then you put all the expectations and views and of at least in my culture, what a woman should be, what a girl should be, then what a woman should be. And I have been sort of working to undo a lot of those expectations and all my life as a woman, and have been evolving more and more of letting go of my own inner, for lack of a better way to put it, my own inner prejudice against women. And because again, growing up in the Midwest, there can be a really tight box that a woman fits in, and that has all sorts of ramifications of and limitations, and so I've worked really hard to continue to work very hard on understanding how that lives in me, and that's sometimes hard. That's hard to know when it's inside of you. You can't see it, and so I've been so as my in Gestalt, I've been done many workshops with Gayla Feinstein and some with Judy Graham and with others on what it is to be female and how to broaden, and that's not a fixed thing, and then the challenges that we face, that we continue to face, and I could go on and on about that. I won't, but just to say, and then with if you're asking relationally with Charlie and I suppose I don't know that we have been somewhat traditional roles at some point in life. Certainly when the kids were younger, he worked more. I stayed home more. I worked, but not in the same way that he did, not with the same number of hours. So I guess those are some traditional ways that we are together as a couple, but that's changing too and evolving as our family has now gotten up and out. Some of that also was kind of practical, and so it's everything's kind of muddy that way. But we're evolving, and now that we are, we had a partner in our Gestalt training program, his name's Steve Roberts, who's our bestest friend. We just love him immensely, and he retired last year, and so it's been an interesting. That's also been interesting. I don't know if it's gender maybe, but just the way we are of us working together on a very even level, and on so that's what comes to my mind.
That's fine. I never really expect any kind of given answer. I just sort of ask it.
Yeah. How about you? What is that?
Geez. Well, I use pronouns he, him.
Yeah.
And this wave of change throughout the world right now has really rocked me a lot. I thought that I was much more open than I am. So conversations about, there are so many new words that are entering into my lexicon that I don't fully understand, that has to do with acceptance and it has to do with appreciating difference. And I'm trying to stay with that. I was having a conversation with one of my daughters, and she said, well, Dad, that's ableism. And I'd never heard that word before. And so, and I don't care what the subject is. If I don't understand a word, I have to figure out what it is. And so that just launched a whole new opening my eyes. So I came from a very prejudiced family in every respect. And it's been a lifelong journey for me, regardless of whether that's racism, sexism, ageism, or any other ism. I think a saving grace for me has always been our relationship, because I've been dedicated to our partnership and our equality. And that back in the days that we met, that was new for me. My previous marriage was very sex role bound, and that, at least in part, that explained why it didn't work out. But with us, I've struggled all along for that not to be the case. And in that personal struggle, there are things I appreciate about being male that are traits that she doesn't own, and then there are traits I appreciate about her being female that I don't own. And ferreting out how much of that's individual versus how much of that might be related to sex differences. More and more, I don't believe there's much sex difference at all. So that's a very growing edge for me, and I like it and I hate it. Put it both ways.
It's that confusion and discomfort kind of space.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's I want to say to you, Heather, that's a tough question, and I can understand why people struggle with that. But I think it's a good question, especially now, to ask that question.
Yeah, I mean, we could also ask about, how do you understand race and power dynamics and privileges? And I think I'll save that for a larger sort of roundtable discussion later on.
Yeah, but those are good questions. They're tough, but good ones.
So it's an interesting sort of time to be cocooned because of the pandemic,
Yeah.
and then have all of this data and information available online so that I can digest it. So I get on the listservs or I watch the news and see the world changing so rapidly. And I get to kind of, enjoy is the wrong word, but kind of embrace and savor that full banquet of, oh, wow. So this is changing in terms of racial equality. So this is changing in terms of appreciating sex equality or gender equality. And I get to do it while I'm digging around in my garden. And that really helps me kind of assimilate things. And it also shows some of my dark side.
Yeah, it's definitely a very strange period, which is going on long enough. It's sort of like being forced to sit in that uncomfortable not knowing that it's pretty much impossible, I think, for most of us to go back to any kind of normal at this point. It's sort of an obligated change in our understanding of ourselves and the world that we're coming back out into. I don't know. I'm fascinated by the whole thing, but that's probably why I got into social anthropology. So,
Right.
the last question that I really have for you, and maybe this is a bit of a storytelling moment, I'm not sure, would be what one of your greatest memories or experiences or moments would be, either as a human being or somehow related to Gestalt. I imagine, that yours in particular may have something to do with Gestalt, but if there's a moment that you would like to speak to, please go ahead.
Man.
Gosh. Go ahead.
Well, again, there's ask me that question any 5-minute period. I flashed on a moment of sitting in a garden restaurant in Boston when I was still maybe 30 years old, with Steve Roberts, our partner and one of best friends, and David Alexander, who was a trainer, therapist, and then good friend forever, still is, and bawling my eyes out. We had been to a Gestalt conference, and it was very early on, maybe the Gestalt Journal's 8th conference, I don't know when it was, and just crying and crying and crying, and at the same time having an awareness that I was doing that in public. And that had a profound influence on me, because I think it was a time when I really got it's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to express emotion anywhere. And that's, it's like, I could think of a lot of defining moments for you and I and other places. That's the one that popped in my mind, because that was, holy cow, that was 30 some years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah,
it was like, I was oddly not too ashamed, and I was very proud of myself. Like, oh, I let that happen for me. And so I kind of hung on to that experience of, if I can just let myself be, life works out pretty good for me.
What about you, Anne?
So I appreciate you going first, and you'll appreciate the story, because the only thing that came up for me, and I thought, oh my gosh, of all of the things that happened in my life, why is this coming up for me? And it was we were in somewhere near Woodstock, and we went to this festival. It was called the Garlic Festival. And you remember, I don't know where that is. It was somewhere out there. We're at, and no, we hadn't been imbibing in anything. We were just at the Garlic Festival. we had just spontaneously ended up there. And what came up for me, what I remember so vividly, and I guess I just feel so much gratitude about it, is that we were walking around and people are dressed up in garlic and they make garlic ice cream and they have garlic this and garlic that, and I felt so present and in the moment, and it was really having the kind of an I thou experience, and I don't know that I'd ever had that before, and as you were talking, I was thinking, I think it comes up that was so monumental for me, because I had worked a very long time. I had a lot of I was very much in my head, always in my head, always thinking, churning things. And it seemed like it was the first moment, maybe there were others, but this is just the memory that comes up for me before then, that I was present, and it was wonderful. And it has stayed with me since, kind of like your experience of, oh, I'm crying in public and it's okay. It's like, oh, this is wonderful, and I can be here sometimes. And it felt like it was a very peaceful, but yet very present and vibrant moment. Who knows why these things come up, but that's what came up for me.
Just imagining all of the money and time and everything invested in all of these trainings and learning.
That's right.
And
it all paid off.
Dressed up as garlic. That is.
Yeah, that's right. It lands at the garlic.
The land of the garlic people.
You really don't get to pick them, do you? The moment.
No.
No, that's right. You just have to be open to the moment.
Right.
Yes, that's right. That is right.
I'm appreciating it. I'm laughing with you. I hope you know.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, unless there's anything that either of you would like to add, now would be the time.
Yeah, I do. I want to say I was an early president of AAGT, and my largest concern as my tenure wrapped up was how in the world this was ever going to continue, and how Gestalt therapy was going to live in the world. Today, I want to say thank you, Heather, because you're one of those people that emerge that go, I'll carry a torch.
Yeah.
And so I no longer, I've long since lost my illusion that things are going to die out as older generations die off or retire, I should say. And so
my retirement first.
Yeah, retire. But I very much appreciate what you do and the direction that we're going in. And I don't always agree with it, but I've never always agreed with anything. So but I love what you're doing. So thank you.
Yes, many thanks, Heather, for all your effort, and your voice is. I hope you continue. I know you will. Actually, you'll continue to have your voice, and thank you for this format, which allows many of us to have a voice in a different way, not as a trainer or as a something, but just as, I love the title of this is Humans of Gestalt. It's very human, and I think that probably reflects very much you as well and how you are.
Thank you. Yeah, this is just, it's the space that I wanted, and it was sort of on the bottom of the list of my priorities of, things that I should be doing. But I gave myself the chance to put it out there. And surprisingly, probably because it is the most me, it's the one that has had the most resonance. So I appreciate it.
That's great.
Authenticity kind of works.
It does. It does.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you both. It's been lovely to meet you. And if it's good with you, I will stop the recording here.
Yes.
Sure.
Perfect.